Have you ever imagined being forced into a marriage you never asked for, tied to a man so powerful and emotionally unreachable that he barely sees you as human? A billionaire whose gaze strips you down to a bargaining chip, a move in a ruthless game of revenge. This is Black Victoria Mitchell's story. A young black woman who accepted a merciless arrangement, believing she was signing a pact with the devil himself, only to discover that the man behind the deal would awaken feelings she never thought she was capable of. And you, where are you watching this from? Drop your city and state in the comments. If intense stories filled with twists, power, and forbidden love pull you in, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss a chapter of this emotional journey. Now, let's begin. Victoria Mitchell lived on the 12th floor of an aging building in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. It wasn't glamorous. The elevator groaned, the hallways smelled faintly of dust and old paint, and the windows rattled when the wind pressed too hard against them. But it was hers, the one piece of independence she had carved out after years of suffocating under her family's control. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with books, law, philosophy, social justice volumes that had kept her company during long nights when sleep refused to come. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the window, turning dust motes into floating sparks as they danced through the air. Victoria sat curled on her worn sofa, bare feet sinking into the thick rug, a mug of coffee growing cold on the table beside her. When the knock came, it shattered the quiet. 3 sharp raps. Dry, impatient. Her body stiffened instantly. She knew that rhythm. Her stomach tightened as if a fist had closed around it. Slowly, she stood, each step toward the door heavy, like walking toward the edge of a cliff. When she opened it, Black Robert Mitchell, her father, stood in the hallway. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. The sharp, calculating eyes she had known all her life were red-rimmed and sunken. His expensive Italian suit, usually immaculate, was wrinkled, hanging off him like it no longer belonged. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and for the first time Victoria could remember, he looked small. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough, almost unfamiliar. She didn't invite him in. She didn't need to. He brushed past her anyway, as if the door and her were obstacles rather than boundaries. Victoria inhaled deeply, closed the door behind him, and turned to face him, arms folding tightly across her chest. "What do you want?" Robert paced the small living room, hands trembling just enough for her to notice. He stopped at the window, staring down at the city as though he might find an escape route carved into the streets below. "I'm in trouble. Sweetheart, you're always in trouble." Her voice carried years of bitterness she no longer bothered to hide. "What is it this time? Another deal gone bad?" He turned around, and for the first time in her life, Victoria saw something in her father's eyes that froze her in place. Fear, real, unfiltered fear. "It's not just money," he said, swallowing hard. "I owe the wrong person. A lot." "How much?" He hesitated, then forced the words out. 200 million. The number dropped into the room like a death sentence. Victoria felt her knees weaken, but she refused to let it show. 200 million, she repeated calmly. "And who exactly do you owe this fortune to?" Robert's mouth opened, then closed again. He walked to the coffee table and leaned heavily on it, head bowed. When he finally spoke, his voice barely rose above a whisper. "Black Lucas Vane." The name cut through the air like lightning. Victoria knew it. Everyone did. Lucas Vane was the most powerful and feared black billionaire in the country. Man who had built an empire from nothing and protected it with absolute ruthlessness. Stories followed him like shadows. People who crossed him vanished from the business world, ruined so thoroughly that no one could trace how it had happened. "You're a fool," Victoria snapped, anger surging hot in her chest. "A complete and absolute fool." "I know," Robert said, lifting his head. Tears filled his eyes she had never seen before. "But there's a way to fix this." "How?" The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Robert wrung his hands together, struggling to speak. "He's willing to forgive the debt." All of it. Her heart dropped. In exchange for what? Robert finally met her gaze, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. "For you," he said. He wants to marry you." The words slammed into her like a physical blow. Victoria stumbled back, breath knocked from her lungs. "You're selling me," she said flatly. "It's not like that. You are selling me." Her voice echoed through the apartment, shattering the calm. "Like I'm property. A transaction. Is that all I am to you?" Robert stepped toward her, hands raised. "Victoria, please. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." She backed into the wall, chest heaving. "You destroyed your life, and now you expect me to pay for it." "He'll give you everything," Robert pleaded. "Money, power, a life you never dreamed of." "Get out," she said. "Get out of my house." He hesitated, shame twisting his features. At the door, he paused, hand on the knob. "You have 1 week to decide," he said quietly. "After that, I don't know what will happen to me." The door closed with a soft click. Victoria stayed where she was, heart pounding, back pressed to the wall. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Not for him. Never for him. She walked to the window and stared out at Atlanta as the city lights flickered on, one by one. Somewhere above it all, in a glass tower piercing the sky, was Black Lucas Vane, a man who wanted to buy her. She closed her eyes and drew in a shaky breath. 1 week. One decision, and a future she couldn't yet imagine waiting on the other side. The next 3 days, blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and relentless thoughts. Victoria barely ate. Meals were abandoned, half finished on the counter, and mugs of coffee went cold in her hands before she remembered to drink them. She drifted through her apartment like a ghost, pacing from room to room, her mind trapped in a constant loop that swung violently between white-hot rage and a hollow numbness that frightened her even more. She replayed her father's words again and again. 1 week, the deadline echoed in her head like a ticking clock. Sometimes she imagined herself screaming at him, listing every selfish choice he had ever made. Other times she imagined packing a bag and disappearing, changing her name, starting over somewhere far away where no one knew who she was. But every fantasy ended the same way of it. Mitchell's debt looming over her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. On the 4th night, exhausted and wired all at once, Victoria made a decision. If Black Lucas Vane wanted to buy her life, she needed to know exactly who he was. And more importantly, she needed to understand why a man with limitless money and power would demand a marriage instead of something simpler, cleaner, more practical. There was a reason. There had to be. She opened her laptop and began to search. The first results were exactly what she expected. Business magazine covers, billionaire rankings, articles praising Lucas Vane's ruthless efficiency and visionary leadership, photos from charity galas and corporate summits where he stood perfectly composed, a faint smile on his lips that never quite reached his eyes. Even through the screen, he radiated authority. He was undeniably handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, built like a man who carried strength effortlessly. His skin was deep and smooth, his jaw sharp, his hair black as ink, always perfectly groomed. His eyes were the darkest thing Victoria had ever seen, so dark they seemed to swallow the light. Around them powerful, controlled, untouchable. But the deeper she searched, the stranger it became. For a man who dominated headlines, there was almost nothing about his personal life. No interviews about his childhood. No mentions of family. No former relationships splashed across tabloids. It was as if his life had begun in his early 20s, fully formed, already armored. Before that, there was almost nothing. Just blank space. Her unease grew. Then she found it an old article from a small-town newspaper in northern Georgia. The headline made her heart slam violently against her ribs. Local businessman Robert Mitchell, implicated in scandal that destroyed the Vane family. Her hands shook as she clicked the link. The article told a story Victoria had never heard. Not once in all her years living under her father's roof. 20 years earlier, Robert Mitchell had been business partners with a man named George Vane, Lucas Vane's father. Together, they had run a thriving construction company, one that was growing fast and attracting serious attention. But Robert, true to form, had wanted more, according to the report. He manipulated contracts, siphoned money into hidden accounts, and forged documents that left George holding the blame when the scheme collapsed. When the fraud was exposed, George Vane lost everything: his company, his reputation, his standing in the community. Shunned, humiliated, and financially ruined. He vanished shortly afterward, abandoning his family and never being seen again. Lucas had been 12 years old. Victoria slammed the laptop shut, her breath coming fast and shallow. Her father hadn't just borrowed money from Lucas Vane. He had destroyed his family. He had stolen his father. And now, 2 decades later, Lucas was collecting payment. Her stomach twisted painfully. But one question refused to leave her mind. Why me? Why a marriage? The answer crept into her thoughts like a whisper, cold and merciless. Because it was the cruelest revenge possible. Taking Robert Mitchell's daughter, making her his, forcing Robert to live knowing that the one thing he truly cared about now belonged to the man he had destroyed. Victoria should have been furious. She should have been planning her escape, looking for a way to burn everything down and run. Instead, another memory surfaced, one she had spent years trying not to examine too closely. Her mother, Black Helen Mitchell, had died when Victoria was 14. The official story had been a car accident, sudden, tragique unavoidable, but even then, something about it had never sat right with Victoria. In the months before her death, Helen had faded. She grew thinner, quieter, her eyes dull, as if the light inside her had been slowly extinguished. Robert had barely noticed. He was always busy, always traveling, always working late. Victoria never had proof, but she had always suspected her father played a role in her mother's unraveling. Now, reading about what he had done to the Vane family, that suspicion hardened into certainty. Robert Mitchell was a monster. He always had been. And maybe, just maybe, Black Lucas Vane wasn't the villain of this story after all. Victoria picked up her phone and dialed the number her father had left. He answered on the first ring. Victoria. His voice cracked with desperate hope. I'm going to meet him, she said firmly. Set it up. Tomorrow. There was a sharp intake of breath. Does that mean you're accepting? I didn't say that, she replied coldly. I said I'm meeting him. Then, I'll decide. She ended the call before he could say another word. That night, sleep never came. Victoria lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about her mother, about betrayal, about power, about revenge. And when dawn finally broke, pale light creeping through the window, she knew exactly what she was going to do. If Black Lucas Vane wanted a deal, she would give him one, but on her terms. And when everything was over, it wouldn't be her who paid the price. It would be Robert Mitchell. The Vane building rose from the heart of Atlanta's financial district like a monument to power. Glass and steel stretched upward into the sky, so tall, it seemed to pierce the clouds themselves. Victoria stopped on the sidewalk and tilted her head back, taking it all in. For the first time since her father had uttered that name, she felt truly small, insignificant, like a single breath before a storm. She forced herself to inhale slowly, grounding her feet against the pavement, then stepped inside. The lobby was designed to intimidate. Polished black marble floors reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead, and the air smelled faintly of money and restraint. Men and women in tailored suits moved with quiet efficiency, while security guards stood at precise intervals, alert and expressionless. A blonde receptionist looked up as Victoria approached, her smile smooth and professional. Ms. Mitchell, she said, already rising. Mr. Vane is expecting you. Please follow me. They crossed the lobby toward a private elevator set apart from the others. The receptionist slid a card, entered a code, and the doors opened with a hushed whisper. Top floor, she said. Mr. Vane's assistant will receive you. Victoria stepped inside alone. The doors closed, sealing her in silence as the elevator began its ascent. The numbers climbed steadily, 40, 50, 60, 70. Her pulse matched the rhythm. The building had 80 floors, and the penthouse claimed the highest point of all. When the doors opened, she found herself in a quiet corridor lined with dark wood panels and softened lighting. A middle-aged black man with graying hair and an impeccable suit waited for her. "Ms. Mitchell," he said with a slight bow. "I'm Marcus, Mr. Vane's personal assistant. Please, follow me." They walked down a long hallway adorned with artwork that looked like it belonged in museums rather than offices. Each step reminded Victoria how far she was from her small apartment, how deeply she had stepped into a world not meant for people like her. Marcus stopped before massive oak double doors. "He's expecting you." The doors opened. The office beyond was vast, an open space dominated by a full wall of glass that offered a breathtaking view of the city below. Bookshelves lined the remaining walls, filled with volumes that hinted at discipline, ambition, and control. At the center stood a heavy mahogany desk. Behind it stood the man she had come to meet. Black Lucas Vane rose as she entered, and for a split second, the air left Victoria's lungs. The photographs had not prepared her for him. He was taller than she imagined, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled his dark suit effortlessly. His skin was smooth and deep-toned, his features sharp and sculpted as if carved with intention. His hair, black and glossy, was slicked back, emphasizing the strong line of his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her completely. Dark, bottomless, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Ms. Mitchell," he said. His voice was low, smooth as velvet edged with steel. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." "I didn't have much choice," Victoria replied, lifting her chin, refusing to let him see how deeply he affected her. One corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "There are always choices. You could have run, disappeared. Many people would have. I'm not many people." "No," he said, his gaze sweeping over her, not leering, not possessive, but assessing, as if she were an equal opponent. "You definitely aren't." He gestured to the chair across from the desk. "Please sit, we have much to discuss." Victoria walked forward, conscious of every step, aware of his eyes following her. She sat straight-backed, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lucas didn't return to his chair. Instead, he leaned against the edge of the desk, close enough that she could smell his collinwoodsy, expensive, touched with leather. "I imagine you have questions," he said. "Several," she replied, starting with the most obvious. "Why? You could demand money, property, shares. Why a wife?" Lucas studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You did your research," he said finally. "You know what your father did to my family." "I do." "Then you already know the answer." His voice hardened, the warmth draining from it. "Your father took everything from me when I was a child. My father, my childhood, my innocence. I swore one day he would pay. And I'm the payment," Victoria said quietly. "Yes." His eyes locked onto hers. "You are the only thing in the world Robert Mitchell loves. He betrayed everyone except you. You are his weakness. So you're using me to hurt him. I want him to spend the rest of his life knowing his daughter belongs to me." Lucas said evenly. "That he can never control you again. Never touch you. Never influence you." The words should have enraged her. They should have sent her running. Instead, she heard something beneath the mold pain, tightly controlled rage, loneliness sharpened into purpose. "And if I say no?" she asked. Lucas tilted his head slightly. "Then, you say no. And your father faces the consequences of his actions. I won't force you, Victoria. This is your choice." Silence stretched between them. "I have conditions," she said at last. His brow lifted. "Conditions? If I accept this deal, it will be on my terms. I won't be a prisoner. I'll continue my studies. I'll have my own life, acceptable. And one more thing." Victoria leaned forward, eyes blazing. "I want to watch my father not just financially. I want his reputation destroyed, his power stripped away. I want the world to know who he really is." For the first time, Lucas's mask cracked. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something like admiration. "You hate your own father," he said. He destroyed my mother, Victoria replied, her voice trembling but firm. And finding out what he did to your family only confirmed what I always knew. Lucas studied her for a long moment, then slowly extended his hand. We have a deal. Victoria stared at his hand. Strong, steady. Once she touched it, there would be no turning back. She reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, warm, controlled. A shiver raced down her spine. Welcome to the Vane family, Lucas said softly, his words sounding less like a greeting and more like a promise. Victoria wasn't sure yet whether it was a promise or a threat. The wedding took place exactly 2 weeks later. Swift and immaculate, stripped of anything resembling romance. It felt less like a celebration and more like a transaction finalized under polished lights. Victoria stood at the altar in a white designer gown that cost more than most people's cars. Selected by a stylist Lucas had hired without consulting her. The dress was undeniably beautiful French lace hugging her frame, a long train whispering across the marble floor of the historic church. But she felt like a mannequin dressed for display rather than a bride, stepping into a new life. The church itself was grand and cold, its towering columns echoing with hushed murmurs from the invited elite. Politicians, executives, and powerful figures filled the pews, all there to witness the unexpected union of Black Lucas Vane. Questions lingered in every glance, curiosity buzzing beneath polite smiles. No one truly understood why he was marrying at all, much less so suddenly. Lucas stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, posture rigid, face composed into a mask of controlled indifference. His hair was slicked back as usual, his expression unreadable. When Victoria began her walk down the aisle, Alonchi had refused to let Robert escort her. Lucas's eyes followed her every step, dark and impenetrable. If he felt anything, he gave no sign. The vows were formal, clean, emotionless. Words spoken because they had to be, not because they carried meaning. The rings were cold against her fingers. When the officiant declared them husband and wife and announced that the groom could kiss the bride, Lucas leaned forward and brushed a kiss against her lips, so brief it might have been imagined. Applause followed. Cameras flashed. The deal was sealed. The reception blurred into a sea of unfamiliar faces and hollow congratulations. Victoria smiled until her cheeks ached, nodded through conversations she barely heard, accepted champagne she never drank. Lucas remained at her side, the perfect host, exchanging handshakes and quiet words, his arm resting lightly at her back, like a carefully placed accessory. Robert was there. Victoria spotted him across the ballroom, moving nervously through the crowd, trying to appear proud, trying to pretend he hadn't traded his own daughter to save himself. Their eyes met once. Just once. Victoria looked away first, her jaw tightening as something inside her hardened permanently. By the time they arrived at the mansion that would now be her home, an enormous estate set behind iron gates on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by manicured gardens and towering walls, Victoria was exhausted to the bone. An elderly butler greeted them at the door, bowing respectfully. Mr. Vane, Mrs. Vane, welcome home. The madam's quarters are prepared as requested, sir. Quarters. Victoria repeated faintly, frowning. Lucas guided her inside, crossing a foyer so large it dwarfed her entire old apartment. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal lighting, and the silence felt thick, almost reverent. You'll have your own room, Lucas explained as they climbed the sweeping staircase. As we agreed. This is a business arrangement. I don't expect you to share my bed. She should have felt relief. Instead, a strange flicker of disappointment stirred in her chest, unwanted and confusing. She pushed it away immediately. The room assigned to her was magnificent, a sprawling suite with a king-size bed, a closet larger than her former living room, and a bathroom outfitted with a jacuzzi tub. Cream and gold tones decorated every surface, elegant and flawless and utterly impersonal. A balcony overlooked the gardens, moonlight glinting off perfectly trimmed hedges below. A housekeeper accompanied her, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes. Mr. Vane's room is at the end of the hall, she said gently. My name is Helen. If you need anything, just use the intercom. The name made Victoria's chest tighten. When she was finally alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and looked around slowly. This was her life now. A gilded cage. A luxury prison. She should have been crying. She should have felt despair pressing down on her lungs. But when she closed her eyes, the only thing that came to mind was the warmth of Lucas's hand during the ceremony. The faint scent of his cologne. The way her body reacted every time he stood too close. What is wrong with me? She whispered into the quiet room. No one answered. The following days settled into a routine so formal, it bordered on absurd. Lucas left before dawn and returned late in the evening. Dinner was served to Victoria alone in the massive dining room, surrounded by more silverware than she knew how to use. When they crossed paths, their exchanges were brief and polite. Good morning. Good morning. Do you need anything? No, thank you. That was it. Victoria began to wonder if she had married a man or a ghost. She tried to keep herself occupied. She explored the mansionete's vast library, private theater, fully equipped gym, indoor pool. Even a greenhouse filled with rare orchids. She resumed her law studies remotely, losing herself in case law and essays. She read everything she could find. Still, nothing filled the quiet ache forming in her chest. By the third week, she'd had enough. That night, she waited in the foyer. It was nearly 10 when Lucas finally arrived, jacket slung over one shoulder, expression tired but controlled. We need to talk, she said. He paused, surprised. Now? Yes, now. He studied her briefly, then nodded. My office. She followed him down a corridor she hadn't explored before, into a smaller, darker office lined with bookshelves and anchored by an unlit fireplace. Lucas poured himself a whiskey and gestured toward the glass. No, thank you, she said. What do you want to discuss? He asked, leaning against the desk, just as he had during their first meeting. Did you bring me here to ignore me? The words came out sharper than she intended. Lucas didn't flinch. Am I ignoring you? You leave before I wake up. You come home when I'm nearly asleep. If the point was to use me as a weapon against my father, you're failing. He doesn't even know what my life is like here. Something flickered across Lucas's face too fast to name. And what is your life like here, Victoria? He asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. Lonely, she admitted before she could stop herself. Empty. Lucas swirled the whiskey in his glass, eyes fixed on the amber liquid, as though it held answers he didn't want to face. I'm not good at this, he said finally. At what? Living with people. Letting them in. He looked up at her. I've spent most of my life alone. I built everything alone. I don't know how to share space. It was the most personal thing he had ever said to her. Victoria felt something inside her soften. You could try, she said gently. Have dinner with me. Talk to me for more than 30 seconds. Lucas studied her with that intense gaze that made her stomach flip. Are you asking me to be your friend? I'm asking you to be human. For a moment, she thought he would shut down again. Instead, the corner of his mouth lifted into something close to a smile. Tomorrow, he said. Dinner at 8. Victoria nodded, hiding how much that small concession meant to her, as she turned to leave. His voice stopped her. Victoria, she looked back. You're not what I expected, he said. Is that good or bad? He didn't answer. He just watched her walk away, his eyes following her, until she disappeared down the hall. That night, for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Victoria fell asleep with something warm and unfamiliar settling in her chest. Hope. Dinner the next evening changed more than Victoria expected. She had spent longer than necessary choosing what to wear, finally settling on a simple navy blue dress that hugged her figure without trying too hard. Her hair fell in soft, natural waves around her shoulders, and she dabbed a hint of perfume on her wrists, annoyed with herself for caring so much. At exactly 8 o'clock, she walked into the dining room. Lucas was already there. He stood when he saw her. Something that startled her more than it should have. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, but a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, muscular forearms. His hair was slightly messier than usual, as if he had run a hand through it and left it that way. "You came," he said. "You sound surprised. I thought you might change your mind. I don't give up easily." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. They sat, staff appearing and disappearing in silence as courses were served. The food was exquisite: appetizer, main course, dessert, but Victoria barely noticed. What surprised her was that they talked, not about logistics or obligations, but genuinely talked. Lucas spoke about his work, not in the dry language of contracts and acquisitions, but about ideas, technology, innovation, projects that could shift entire systems. His intensity softened when he spoke about creating something lasting, something that mattered. Victoria found herself leaning forward, listening closely. She talked about her law studies, her passion for human rights, her desire to work with people who had no voice and no protection. Lucas listened, really listened, asking questions, challenging her views without dismissing them. Time slipped by, unnoticed. By the time desert was cleared, it was after 11. "I didn't expect this," Victoria admitted quietly, turning the stem of her wineglass between her fingers. "Expect what?" "You," she said honestly. "To be pleasant." Lucas let out a low sound that might have been a laugh. "You say that like it's an insult." "It's not. It's just, you're different from what I imagined." "And what did you imagine?" "A monster," she said, meeting his eyes, cold, cruel, obsessed with power and revenge. Lucas's gaze dropped to his glass. "Maybe I am a little of that. Maybe we all are," Victoria replied softly. When he looked up, something unguarded flickered across his face. Vulnerability, old and carefully hidden. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, "letting me see this side of you." "Because you asked," he said, after a long pause, "and because it's been a long time since anyone cared enough to." The words settled heavily between them. "Can we do this again?" Victoria asked. "Dinner? Talking?" Lucas studied her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "We can." From then on, everything shifted. Lucas began coming home earlier. Dinners became routines, sometimes formal, sometimes casual, sometimes takeout, eaten at the kitchen counter, with wine bottles left open between them. They talked about everything and nothing: books, movies, philosophy, politics, dreams, regrets. Victoria discovered that Lucas had a dry, unexpected sense of humor that surfaced when he relaxed. He discovered that she was stubborn, sharp-tongued, and incapable of letting an argument go unanswered. They debated fiercely: politics, ethics, films, but never cruelly. And without either of them realizing it, walls began to crumble. Victoria started thinking about him during the day, waiting for the sound of his footsteps at night, smiling at memories of things he had said. Lucas noticed more than he admitted. Books she mentioned appeared on her nightstand. Fresh flowers greeted her every morning: white lilies, her favorite, something she had only mentioned once. When her studies overwhelmed her, he appeared with hot chocolate and insisted she take breaks. One night, while watching a movie in the mansion's private theater, Victoria fell asleep with her head resting on his shoulder. When she woke, she was in her bed, tucked beneath a blanket, the room quiet and dark. She didn't remember how she got there, but she knew, with a certainty that sent a shiver through her, that Lucas had carried her. "This is dangerous," she whispered to the empty room. Because Victoria Mitchell was beginning to feel something for the man she was supposed to hate, and she had no idea how to stop it. It happened on a Friday night in October. Victoria couldn't sleep. She had just finished a demanding paper for her law course, her mind still buzzing with adrenaline and restless energy. No matter how she shifted beneath the sheets, sleep refused to come. Finally, she gave up. She slipped out of bed and padded quietly toward the kitchen, the mansion silent around her. It was nearly midnight. The corridors were dimly lit by soft security lights, shadows stretching along the walls. Victoria walked barefoot across the cool marble floor, wearing only an oversized t-shirt that brushed mid. She made herself a cup of tea, moving carefully, savoring the quiet. On her way back, she passed the hallway where Lucas's room was located. His door was slightly open. Light spilled through the narrow gap, warm and inviting. She should have kept walking. She knew that. She should have gone back to her room, climbed into bed, forced herself to sleep. But something made her slow down. Curiosity, instinct, something deeper she didn't yet have a name for. She glanced inside. Lucas stood with his back to the door, framed by the large window overlooking the city. His hair was still wet, droplets of water sliding down his broad shoulders and muscular back. He wore only gray sweatpants, hanging low on his hips, revealing the sharp lines of his abdomen. The muscles beneath his skin shifted as he rubbed a towel through his hair, and Victoria felt her breath catch, painfully, in her throat. He was magnificent. There was no other word for it. Then he turned, their eyes locked, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Victoria's heart slammed against her ribs, loud enough that she was sure he could hear it. Lucas's gaze swept over her slowly from her bare legs to the loose shirt clinging softly to her body. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough. "What are you doing here?" I was... She swallowed. "Your door was open, and you decided to stop and stare." Her face burned. "I wasn't staring." "Yes, you were." It was true. They both knew it. Lucas took a step toward her. Then, another. Victoria knew she should back away, leave, say something smart or defensive, but her feet refused to move. He stopped less than 3 feet away, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body, to smell soap and something unmistakably him. "You should go to your room," he said. It wasn't an order. It was a warning. "I know," she whispered. But she didn't move. Lucas raised his hand slowly, carefully, as if approaching something fragile. His fingers brushed her cheek, barely touching, then traced down her jaw. The contact sent a shock through her body. Victoria closed her eyes, leaning into the touch without meaning to. "Look at me," he said. His voice strained. She opened her eyes. What she saw there stole her breath. Hunger raw, controlled, restrained by sheer force of will. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't indifference. It was desire, intense and barely contained. "If you don't leave now," Lucas said carefully, "I won't be able to stop. Do you understand?" She should have listened. She should have remembered contracts and consequences. Instead, she stepped closer and pressed her lips to his dot. The kiss exploded between them. Lucas groaned, his hands gripping her waist as he pulled her against him. His mouth claimed hers with urgency that left her dizzy, stealing her breath, igniting something deep inside her. The teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, but neither of them noticed. Victoria wrapped her arms around his neck, fingers threading into his damp hair. "Victoria," he murmured against her lips. "Are you sure?" "Shut up," she whispered, kissing him again. Lucas lifted her effortlessly, one arm under her thighs, the other supporting her back. She wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively as he carried her into the bedroom, never breaking the kiss. He laid her down gently, a tenderness that contrasted with the urgency burning between them. His weight hovered over her, solid and warm. His mouth traced her neck, teasing, drawing soft gasps and sounds she didn't recognize as her own. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. "So incredibly beautiful." His hand slipped beneath the hem of her shirt, sliding over her bare skin. Victoria arched, craving more, needing more, and then fear struck, sudden, crushing. Memories she kept buried surged forward, the loss of control, the vulnerability, the unknown. Panic wrapped around her chest like ice. "Wait," she choked. "Stop, please." Lucas froze instantly. In one heartbeat, he was over her. In the next, he had pulled away completely, sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing hard. "I'm sorry," Victoria said shakily. "I don't know what happened." "Don't apologize," he replied quietly. "You don't owe me anything." She pushed herself up, embarrassed and overwhelmed. "It's not that I don't want, I know," he said, finally looking at her, his eyes gentle. "It's okay, truly." He stood, running a hand through his hair in frustration at himself, not at her. "You should go back to your room. Try to rest." Victoria wanted to explain. to make him understand it wasn't rejection, that she was still learning her own limits. But the words wouldn't come. She walked to the door on trembling legs. Before leaving, she glanced back. Lucas stood at the window again, his back rigid, shoulders tense as if holding the weight of the world. "Good night, Victoria," he said without turning. She closed the door quietly behind her and slid down to the floor in her room, tears finally spilling freely in the dark. The following days were torture. Lucas shut down completely. The warmth that had begun to grow between them vanished. He cancelled dinners. He left early and returned late. When they crossed paths, his greetings were distant, polite, professional. Victoria tried to talk to him. "Lucas, we need to talk about what happened. There's nothing to discuss. You're avoiding me. I'm busy. You're lying." He finally turned, and what she saw in his eyes hurt more than anger ever could. Pain, carefully hidden behind indifference. "I made a mistake," he said coldly. "It won't happen again." "A mistake," she repeated softly, stunned. He didn't answer. He simply walked away, leaving her alone in the hallway with her heart in pieces. What Victoria didn't know was what was happening inside Lucas. Every night, he relived the moment, her lips, her breath, the sound she made when he touched her. Somewhere between dinners and conversations and quiet moments, Lucas Vane had fallen in love with the woman who was never supposed to be anything more than revenge. When she asked him to stop, something inside him broke, not from rejection, but from fear. Fear that she would never truly want him, that he would always be an obligation, a contract, a husband by force. So he did what he had always done when emotions threatened to destroy him. He built the walls. Back up, and in doing so, he was hurting both of them. A week passed, and it felt longer than all the months Victoria had spent in the mansion combined. The house returned to its earlier silence, but this time it was heavier, charged with things unsaid. Lucas withdrew completely. If before he had been distant out of habit, now the distance felt deliberate, calculated. He cancelled their dinners without explanation. He left before dawn and returned long after night had settled in. When they crossed paths in hallways or shared spaces, his acknowledgements were brief polite nods, quiet greetings, nothing more. It hurt more than Victoria expected. She tried to focus on her studies, but the words on the screen blurred together. She replayed that night over and over, wondering how something that had felt so right could unravel so quickly. She blamed herself for panicking, for freezing, for not being brave enough to explain. Finally, she stopped him in the hallway. "Lucas, we need to talk." He didn't slow his steps. "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is," she insisted, stepping in front of him. "You're avoiding me. I'm busy with work. You're lying." That made him stop. He turned to face her, and what she saw in his eyes made her chest tighten. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was something quieter and far more painful: hurt, buried beneath a layer of emotional armor. "What do you want me to say, Victoria?" he asked, his voice flat. "The truth?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "The truth." "The truth," he repeated slowly, "is that I crossed the line. I shouldn't have let it happen." Her heart stuttered. "You think it was a mistake?" "Yes." The word was sharp, final. "It won't happen again." The hallway felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. "A mistake," she echoed, disbelief threading through her voice. "That's all it was to you?" Lucas didn't answer. He stepped around her and walked away, leaving her standing, alone with the echo of his footsteps and the unmistakable feeling that something precious had slipped through her fingers. What Victoria couldn't see was the war raging inside him. Lucas Vane had spent his entire life learning how not to feel. Vulnerability had always come with consequences. Trust led to betrayal. Love had been stripped from him long before he knew how to protect it. So he had built walls high, unbreakable, safe. And then Victoria had walked in. With her sharp mind, her quiet strength, her refusal to be intimidated. Somewhere between late dinners and heated debates, laughter and shared silences, he had fallen in love with her. The realization terrified him. When she asked him to stop, even knowing she had every right to, the fear took over. Fear that she would never truly choose him. Fear that he was just an obligation, a contract she tolerated because she had no other option, so he retreated. It was safer that way, or at least, that was what he told himself during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come and her absence burned like a wound. Everything changed the morning. Victoria found the box. It sat outside her bedroom door, small and elegant. Inside lay a stunning red designer gown, perfectly fitted, accompanied by matching jewelry and an embossed invitation to a high-profile charity event scheduled for that evening. A note rested on top: "We need to keep up appearances. Be ready at 7 o'clock." Victoria stared at the words, her fingers trembling slightly. So this was what they were now: notes, obligations, performances. For a moment, she considered refusing, sending everything back untouched, but then another thought surfaced. This was her chance. A forced moment together. An opportunity to confront him, to make him look at her, to hear her. At exactly 7, she descended the grand staircase. The red dress clung to her curves like it had been designed for her body alone. Her hair was swept into an elegant bun, diamond earrings catching the light. When Lucas looked up and saw her, something flickered across his face, fast, but unmistakable. His eyes darkened. His jaw tightened. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you." She met his gaze. "You don't look bad yourself." He didn't. In a black tuxedo, Lucas was devastating: broad shoulders, narrow waist, power wrapped in silken steel. He offered his arm. She took it. The car ride was tense, silence pressing in from all sides. Victoria broke it first. "You can't avoid me forever." "I'm not avoiding you." "Yes, you are. And I want to know why." He didn't answer right away. Then she spoke again, her voice steady, despite the pounding of her heart. "That night," she said, "I didn't ask you to stop because I didn't want you." Lucas turned to her sharply. "I was scared," she continued. "Not of you. Of myself. Of how intense everything felt." She swallowed. "I've never been with anyone before. Not like that." The words settled between them. Lucas's voice softened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was embarrassed," she admitted. "Because I thought you'd see me as weak. Or childish." "Never," he said firmly. "Never that." He exhaled slowly. "I thought you were rejecting me. I thought you realized you didn't want me. I shouldn't have pulled away," she said gently. "And you shouldn't have shut me out." They sat in silence for a moment, honesty hanging thick in the air. "What do we do now?" Victoria asked. Lucas reached out and intertwined his fingers with hers. "We start over," he said, slowly, "at your pace." Warmth spread through her chest. "And if I don't know what my pace is, then we figure it out together." For the first time in days, Victoria felt something lift. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't broken beyond repair. From that night forward, things didn't change all at once. There was no dramatic shift, no sweeping declaration that magically fixed everything. Instead, the change came slowly, patiently, like something fragile being rebuilt, piece by piece. Lucas kept his word. He didn't push. He didn't rush. He gave Victoria space without disappearing, attention without pressure. He courted her in quiet ways that mattered more than any extravagant gesture ever could. Every morning, when Victoria woke up, there was a cup of fresh coffee waiting on her nightstand. Not delivered by staff. She discovered that one morning when she woke earlier than usual and caught Lucas quietly slipping out of her room, careful not to wake her. "You wake up before 5 just to bring me coffee?" she asked later, incredulous. He shrugged as if it were nothing. "You function better with caffeine." The books kept appearing but now they came with small handwritten notes tucked inside the covers. "Thought of you on page 47. I completely disagreed with the author. But I think you'll love this part. This reminded me of you." He started taking her out into the city. Places he had never shown anyone. A tiny bookstore hidden in an alley that carried first editions of classic novels. A rooftop garden atop an abandoned building where wildflowers pushed stubbornly through cracked concrete. A small family-owned restaurant where the owner greeted Lucas like a long-lost son and served Victoria the best lasagna she had ever tasted. "How do you find these places?" she asked one night as they shared dessert beneath a sky scattered with stars. "I spent a lot of time alone," Lucas replied quietly. "At first, because I had to. Later, because it was easier not to get hurt." Victoria reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "And now?" His gaze met hers, something vulnerable flickering there. "Now I'm learning that some people are worth the risk." Little by little, the man behind the mask revealed himself. She learned that Lucas woke every morning at 4:30 to train, a habit left over from the years he boxed just to survive. She learned that he anonymously funded 3 orphanages across the city, places that didn't just provide shelter, but education and opportunity for children who hadn't been born with privilege. She learned about the legal team he maintained exclusively for women escaping domestic violence, a project he had built quietly in honor of his mother. "My stepfather abused her," Lucas admitted one night, his voice low. "She got out eventually. Not everyone does." "Why hide all this?" Victoria asked softly. "I don't hide it," he replied, genuinely confused. "I just don't do it for recognition. I do it because it needs to be done." She studied him for a long moment. The world saw a ruthless tyrant. She was beginning to see something very different. "You're a good man, Lucas," she said. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Most people would disagree. Most people don't know you." The first kiss after their conversation in the car happened 3 weeks later. They were sitting in the mansion's library, each reading quietly at opposite ends of the couch. Victoria's feet rested comfortably in Lucas's lap, a casual intimacy that had developed naturally over time. She glanced up from her book and found him already watching her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "You just do this thing with your mouth when you concentrate." "What thing?" Instead of answering, he set his book aside and leaned in slowly, deliberately. Giving her time to pull away, she didn't. His lips brushed hers gently. A soft, careful kiss that carried none of the desperation of before. It was tender, restrained, and full of promise. When he pulled back, her eyes were shining. "That was daring," he offered. "If you want it to be," she replied, tugging him back for another kiss. It was during one quiet afternoon in November that everything changed. Victoria had been exploring a lesser-used wing of the mansion when she came across an old office coated in dust and neglect. She was about to leave when a single file on the desk caught her attention. Mitchell. Her heart began to race. She opened it. Inside were documents, pages and pages of them. Financial records, testimonies, investigation reports. As she read, a horrifying picture formed piece by piece. Lucas hadn't just gathered evidence against Robert Mitchell for business crimes. He had built a complete case. Then she reached the section about her mother. Black Helen Mitchell hadn't simply deteriorated emotionally. She had been systematically destroyed. The documents detailed years of emotional abuse, psychological manipulation, financial control. Reports showed how Robert had isolated her, drained her resources, and broken her down until she no longer recognized herself. Victoria's hands shook violently as she read the final pages. Robert had been having an affair with Helen's best friend Leslie for more than a decade. Helen had discovered the truth shortly before her collapse. Victoria sank to the floor, bile rising in her throat. Her mother hadn't been weak. She hadn't been broken by accident. She had been destroyed. "Victoria," she looked up to see Lucas standing in the doorway, his face pale. "You knew," she said, her voice eerily calm. "All this time, you knew." "I was going to tell you," he said quickly, moving toward her. "I was waiting for the right moment." "The right moment." She laughed bitterly. "Is there ever a right moment to learn your father destroyed your mother? I wanted to protect you, protect me." Her voice broke. "You decided when I was allowed to be devastated." "I was afraid," Lucas admitted. "Afraid you'd hate me. Afraid I'd lose you." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Victoria whispered, "My father did this, not you." Tears filled her eyes. I just wish my mum were here. That she knew, I finally understood. Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I will destroy him, he said quietly. He will lose everything. Victoria pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. No, she said firmly. We will together. They built the plan. Over the following weeks, evidence was compiled and coordinated with trusted journalists, lawyers, and past victims. The first exposed detonated like a bomb: financial fraud, offshore accounts, forged contracts. Days later came the testimonies. Then, the final blow, a televised investigation exposing Helen Mitchell's suffering in full. Victoria watched it alone, tears streaming freely, not from pain, but relief. The truth was finally out. A week later, Robert Mitchell arrived at the mansion. Victoria met him in the garden. He looked unrecognizable, aged, broken, desperate. When he begged her to make Lucas stop, she listened silently. Then she told him everything. Every betrayal, every lie, every wound he had inflicted. When she finally turned away, leaving him on his knees, Victoria felt something she had never felt before. Freedom. That night, after everything had finally been exposed, Victoria found Lucas in his office. He was standing over his desk, papers spread out in front of him, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight with concentration. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up, immediately, and whatever he saw on her face made him abandon the work, without a second thought. He asked, crossing the room to her. She let out a shaky breath. I don't know, she admitted honestly. Relieved, angry, sad, maybe all of it at once. Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her firmly, grounding her. She rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. You were incredible today, he murmured into her hair. The way you stood up to him. I've never seen strength like that. I couldn't have done it without you, she said quietly. He pulled back just enough to look at her. You could do anything, Victoria. With or without me. She shook her head gently. But I don't want to. Something shifted between them, subtle, electric. Lucas inhaled as if bracing himself. Victoria, I love you, she said suddenly. The words surprised even her, tumbling out before doubt could stop them. I know this wasn't supposed to happen. We started with a deal, with revenge, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, and I won't pretend otherwise. For a moment, Lucas stood frozen, his expression unreadable. Then slowly a real smile formed on his lips, not the controlled curve she had seen before, but something open, genuine, almost boyish. I've loved you since the day you walked into my office, he said, his voice unsteady. Since you refused to be intimidated, since our first dinner, the first laugh, the first moment you looked at me like I was more than a monster. He cupped her face in his hands. I spent my whole life believing I wasn't capable of love. That part of me died when my father disappeared. But you, his voice caught. You brought me back to life. Tears spilled freely now, but Victoria didn't bother wiping them away. Lucas, she whispered, I love you. I will love you every day for the rest of my life, he replied. If you'll let me. Instead of answering, she kissed him. The kiss began softly, tender and emotional, full of everything words couldn't hold. Then, it deepened slowly, surely turning warm and urgent, charged with choice instead of fear. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Are you sure? Lucas asked quietly. I never want you to feel trapped. I'm sure, she said without hesitation. I want you, completely. Lucas lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Victoria wrapped her legs around his waist, arms around his neck. Laughter mixing with tears as he carried her from the office down the hall to his bedroom. The door closed behind them with a soft click. This time, there was no panic, no hesitation, only trust, only desire, freely given, only love. Victoria woke the next morning, bathed in sunlight. For a moment, she was disoriented, till she felt a warm arm around her waist, a solid chest at her back, Lucas's slow, steady breathing against her neck. She smiled carefully. She turned to face him, studying his features softened by sleep. Awake, he always seemed guarded, carrying the weight of the world. Asleep, he looked almost young, vulnerable. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, his eyes opened. "Good morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," she replied, smiling. "You're watching me." "I am," she said openly. "Any complaints?" Instead of answering, he pulled her closer, burying his face in the curve of her neck. "None," he murmured. "You can watch me as much as you want." They stayed tangled together, unhurried, savoring the quiet. Then Victoria spoke softly. "What happens now?" Lucas lifted his head to look at her. "What do you want to happen?" She hesitated. "Our deal. It's over. You got your revenge." His expression turned serious. "Do you think I still see this marriage as a deal?" She didn't answer. "When I said I loved you," he continued, "I meant every word. You're not payment. You're not obligation. You are," he searched for the right words. "Everything." Her eyes filled again. "What if I want more?" "Tell me." "A real marriage," she said. "A real life. Children someday. Chaos and laughter and love." Lucas silenced her with a kiss. "I want all of it," he said firmly. "With you." Then he slipped out of bed, leaving her confused until he returned with a small velvet box. Victoria's heart stopped. Lucas knelt beside the bed. "I know we're already married," he said quietly. "But that wedding was a transaction. This," he opened the box, revealing a delicate ring with a diamond framed by emeralds that caught the light. "This is my choice. Victoria Mitchell Vane," he said, voice shaking. "Will you marry me for real?" Tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, kissed her hand, and pulled her into an embrace that sealed the promise. For the first time, the marriage was no longer a cage, it was a choice, and it was love. They lay tangled together in the rumpled sheets, the morning light spilling softly through the curtains, painting everything in warm gold. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The quiet between them felt full instead of empty, charged with promise instead of fear. "Should we have a ceremony?" Victoria asked eventually, tracing idle circles on Lucas's chest. "A real one. We can do whatever you want," Lucas replied easily. "A vow renewal. Something big. Something small." She thought for a moment. Small, she decided. Just us. And the people who truly matter. Then that's exactly what we'll do. The ceremony took place a month later on a deserted beach at sunset. There were no designers, no press, no rigid expectations. Victoria wore a simple white dress that moved freely in the ocean breeze. Her bare feet sinking into the sand, wildflowers woven into her hair. Lucas wore light linen, sleeves rolled up. Relaxed in a way she had never seen him before. Their guests were few, but meaningful. The staff from the orphanage Lucas had supported for years stood nearby, along with teenagers and young adults whose lives he had quietly helped change. They didn't see him as a billionaire or a legend, only as the man who had shown up for them. There was no official. Instead, they read vows they had written themselves. "When I met you," Victoria said, her voice trembling just slightly, "I thought you were my enemy. The man who was going to take everything from me. But you gave me more than I ever believed I deserved. You gave me safety. You gave me truth. You gave me love." She swallowed. "I promise to stand beside you in everything, in joy, in pain, in growth, and in all the dreams we'll still build together." Lucas squeezed her hands. "You came into my life like a storm," he said, emotion thick in his voice. "You challenged everything I thought I knew about myself. You taught me how to feel again." His eyes shone. "I promise to love you with honesty, to protect what we build, and to never hide behind walls again." When they kissed, applause rose around them as the sun dipped into the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with color. 2 years later, the mansion that once felt cold and hollow pulsed with life. Victoria walked down the hallway, barefoot, cradling a warm mug of tea. Sunlight streamed through wide windows. Illuminating framed photos lining the walls, travel memories, quiet smiles, moments of laughter frozen in time. She stopped in front of one image in particular. Lucas, holding a baby, his face once so guarded, was transformed by a smile so open it almost startled her every time she saw it. "Mama." Victoria turned as Lucas appeared, hair messy, eyes sleepy, carrying their 18-month-old daughter, Sophia. Victoria took her into her arms, covering her with kisses, as Sophia giggled. "She woke up early," Lucas said with a yawn. "Just like you." "I am not stubborn," Victoria replied lightly. "You're the most stubborn person I know," he said, affection clear in his eyes. "And I love you for it." Over breakfast, Lucas glanced at his phone and frowned slightly. "News about your father." Victoria's chest tightened, but she stayed calm. Robert Mitchell had lost everything: money, power, reputation. He now lived quietly, working a modest job, far removed from the man he once was. "What does it say?" she asked. "He's trying to rebuild." Slowly, Victoria looked down at Sophia, sleeping peacefully against her chest. "Do you think people can really change?" Lucas considered it. Sometimes, when they're finally forced to face who they are. Later that afternoon, Victoria found Lucas sitting in the garden, the same place where she had once confronted her father. She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I spent most of my life driven by anger," Lucas said quietly. "Planning revenge, building walls." He turned to her. "Now I wake up every day with a family. With love. I never imagined this was possible for me." "You deserve it," Victoria said softly. He kissed her temple. "So do you." Years later, when their hair had turned gray and their hands bore the marks of time, they would still sit on that same bench, fingers intertwined, watching the garden they had grown together, and when their grandchildren asked how they met, Victoria would smile. "It started as a deal," she would say, "a cruel one," Lucas would add. "But it became the greatest love of our lives." Because sometimes, the most unexpected beginnings lead to the truest endings. And sometimes, from the ashes of pain and revenge, love is born not perfect, but real.